When is language possible? Research into how language is possible is complexly interconnected with research into when language may have been possible. So, our next step is to review some of the recent data that may allow us to speculate on the question of when language might have begun. Such an endeavor takes us more firmly into biology, neurology, physical anthropology, and the archaeology as we attempt to sort out the development of the physical possibilities. Most of the research to date on this aspect of our question has focused on two key areas: the human brain and the human vocal apparatus. Research on the brain has made it clear that the ability to handle complex symbol systems such as language resides in this organ. Research on the human vocal apparatus is a bit more controversial, in part because it has become clear in recent years that the language is more than just a speech, that the human facility with language includes signed as well as spoken language. Nonetheless, in view of the body of data surrounding the origins of spoken language, we will present and discuss the evidence and assume that it will help us to understand the larger picture as well. So let's begin with the brain. Whether the human brain is hardwired with a universal core grammar or just a setup to facilitate learning and using language, it is clear that the human brain makes language possible in important and intriguing ways. Although the human brain weighs only about 3 pounds, it is an enormously complex organ. The human brain contains more than 1 trillion cells. 100 billion of those cells are neurons or nerve cells linked in networks related to memory, intelligence, creativity, emotion, consciousness, and of most interest to us, language. These neurons reside in the cortex, which is convoluted surface of the brain. The oldest part of the cortex, evolutionarily speaking, controls such things as long-term memory and emotion. The neocortex, or the younger and larger part of the cortex, is where we must look to understand how language is possible. The neocortex is divided into frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes, or sections which are separated by especially folds known as sulci. One of the most striking aspects of the human brain is its division into two somewhat symmetrical hemispheres, also called as cerebral hemispheres. The two hemispheres, one on the left and one on the right, are joined in the middle by the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is a thick band of nerve fibers that divides the cerebral cortex lobes into left and right hemisphere and also connects the left and right hemispheres, allowing for communication between both hemispheres. An interesting thing about these two hemispheres is that each one controls the side of the body opposite to it. The two hemispheres control a lot more than just the two sides of your body. Language and spatial perception are also controlled by the two hemispheres, with language handled by the left hemisphere and perceptual pattern recognition handled by the right hemispheres. Language can be mapped into the left brain in about 99% of right-handed people and 66% of left-handed people. In general, the left brain is better with language, rhythmic perception, and mathematics, as well as with making judgment about time and about the order of the event. The right brain is better at matching patterns, recognizing faces, and helping out with spatial orientation. Damage to either hemisphere of the brain will result in weakness in the opposite side of the body, as well as the impairment of specific functions controlled by that particular hemisphere. In particular, damage to the right side of the brain will result in perceptual difficulties, while damage to the left side of the brain causes language disorders of various sorts, depending on the specific site of the damage. This is true for sight as well as for spoken language, even though signing may seem more like a gestural or visual or spatial skill, and therefore controlled by the right hemisphere. Studies of deaf signers suggest that signing, if the right brain is damaged, coherent signing is still possible, but if the left brain is damaged, people have difficulty signing coherently, just as hearing speakers have difficulty speaking coherently. This suggests that it is language in general and the ability to communicate using language that is controlled by the left side of the brain rather than just speech or spoken language. For example, if you put an apple in the left hand of a person with a split brain and you don't let him or her see it, the person can sense the presence of the apple but can't name it. If you let the person see the apple using the left eye and only the left eye, then the person can point at the apple and gesture at it, but still can't name it or talk about it. If instead you put something, let's say an orange, into the same person's right hand, the person can name it as well as describe it and talk about it. Clearly, language is located in some way in the left half of the brain and not in the right half. So to sum it up, language in general is controlled by the left hemisphere, while the visual and spatial ability is controlled by the left hemisphere. Right hemisphere rather. Even though every individual brain is unique, it is still possible to map the general areas of the brain that are involved in using language. The most important of these appear to Broca's and Wernicke's areas, both located in the cerebral hemisphere. Broca's area, an area of the frontal region of the left cerebral hemisphere, is named for Paul Broca, the medical doctor who first located it and proposed its connection with language. People with damage to Broca's area have difficulty pronouncing words clearly. They pause a lot while trying to compose and produce words. They seem to have difficulty with function words. For example, of and if or but, and sometimes they even have difficulty with correct word order. More recent work using functional magnetic resonance imaging and later ECOG have led us to believe that information is processed in Broca's area. It seems to be a space in the brain in which the idea of the sounds that need to be produced connects to the mechanical instruction the vocal apparatus needs to produce the intended combination of sounds. In contrast to Broca's patients, Wernicke's patients could pronounce words clearly, but they couldn't put their words together into meaningful sentences. Their sentences were garbled and they also had difficulty understanding spoken language. The affected area Wernicke discovered was also in the left hemisphere but in the temporal lobe, farther back than Broca's area. The area is known as Wernicke's area and it appears to control the understanding of words and ability to converse with others. A neutral pathway called the arcuate fasciculus was long thought to connect Wernicke's and Broca's area, but it has now been found to do even more general work connecting the posterior receptive areas near Wernicke's and area to the premotor motor areas near Broca's area. In the late 20th century, neurolinguists Antonio and Hannah Damasio proposed a model in which both the left and right hemispheres of the brain are engaged in identifying and classifying concepts, while the left brain controls both the linguistic naming of those concepts and the connection of linguist forms such as sounds, words, grammar, and so on, with the corresponding concepts. In addition, they suggested that words and sentences are formed in areas, such as Broca's area, that nouns appear to be handled in a large area surrounding Broca's area and including Wernicke's area, and that verbs appear to be handled in yet another area just forward of Broca's area. It is especially interesting that brain neurons learn as they grow, becoming specialized for their particular brain areas in response to contextual cues. This research suggests that Broca's, Wernicke's, and other language-related areas of the brain may indeed develop in humans in the context of language learning. Clearly, this is a rapidly evolving field of study, and there is still much to be learned about the way that language is mapped onto and perhaps even contributes to the development of the brain. New research into the impact of bilingualism on brain architecture seems to indicate an interactive relationship between our human brains and the language or languages we speak in ways that have only recently become observable. Knowing how and when these complexities could have evolved can help us to better pinpoint how and when language may have evolved in humans, and for this, we need to turn to archaeology, to physical anthropology, and to the fossil records. This means that we can tell quite a bit about the evolution of human and pre-human brains just by examining the fossil records. We can see when the neocortex became complexly convoluted, and we can see when Broca's and Wernicke's area began to appear. An individual with evidence of Broca's area must certainly have been capable of language, whether spoken or signed. What does the fossil record tell us about these things? Language areas of the brain in the fossil record. The primate lineage is believed to have split into two branches between 10 and 13 million years ago. A further split, perhaps 5 to 6 million years ago, separated the precursors of chimpanzees from those of humans. Australopithecus is currently considered the earliest genus on the human or hominid line. Sometime between 2.5 and 2 million years ago, a second hominid genus emerged, splitting off Australopithecus genus. The first species in this new genus was dubbed Homo habilis because its remains were found with crude stone tools as scrapers and choppers. The Australopithecus brain dated to between 1.26 and 1 million years ago appears ape-like, both in basic overall and in the imprint of the frontal orbital lobes of the brain. The Homo habilis brain dated between 1.8 and 2 million years ago differs from the Australopithecus brain both in overall shape and in having distinct frontal and parietal lobes with a clear sulcus separating the two. In addition, the lower parietal lobe appears more convoluted and enlarged with Homo habilis brain. This development suggests the presence of Broca's as well as Wernicke's area, making possible the motor functions necessary for speech and signs. Handedness may also have been possible at this point in time. Thus, Homo habilis seems to be the earliest species to have a human-like brain structure and to be capable of spoken or sign language. Language in the human vocal apparatus. It is possible that sign and spoken language developed at roughly the same time. Once the brain mechanism for language were present, there is no particular reason to imagine that both of these forms of language were not also developing. Perhaps early Homo habilis was using both signs and speech. Signs would have been more useful during hunting, and speech would have been more useful during times when one's hands were busy. Both could have been used in tandem at moments of leisure. Or signed language could have been developed first and been gradually replaced in prominence by spoken language. We mentioned earlier that non-human primates can be taught to use simple sign language, but that they are unable to reproduce human speech. In the 1960s, linguistic anthropologist Philip Lieberman showed that the main reason for this is the difference in shape of the human vocal tract. In particular, the larynx, where your vocal cords are located, in humans than in other primates. What is especially important about this is that a lower larynx makes for a longer pharynx, the space above the vocal cords in which air resonates on its own or on its way to the mouth and nose. As Lieberman's research demonstrated, having a longer pharynx makes it possible to produce a greater variety of vowels. Much of this is done by moving the tongue backward and forward in the space available, thus changing the space or shape of the pharynx as well as the shape of the oral cavity. Changing the shape of the pharynx, which is the resonating chamber for vowels, allows us to produce such different sounding vowels as e, u, and a. The more flexible human tongue also produces a wider variety of consonants than most of other animals are capable of. Lieberman was able to demonstrate in his 1960s research was that human infants, as well as non-human mammals, are limited in the range of vowels and consonants they can produce because of the higher placement of the larynx. The supralaryngeal vocal tract, or the vocal tract above the larynx, is made up of soft tissue and cartilage, so it is never present in fossil remains. Still, Lieberman and his colleagues have succeeded in reconstructing fossil supralaryngeal vocal tracts using the methods of comparative anatomy. Key in this reconstruction are the basic cranium, the base or bottom of the skull, and the lower jaw. A more curved basicranium indicates a lower larynx. A straighter basicranium suggests a higher larynx. The ape-like Australopithecines, as late as 1.5 million years ago, appear to have had supralaryngeal vocal tracts similar to those of modern living apes, and therefore are assumed to have had larynxes high in their throats as modern apes do. According to Lieberman and his colleagues, the basicrania of Neanderthals 130 years to 30 years ago are flatter and straighter than those of modern humans, and their palates are longer. This means that the Neanderthal larynx would have been higher than in modern humans, and that Neanderthals would therefore have been limited in the variety of sounds they could produce. Some research into other mammals, however, indicates that it's possible to lower the larynx when producing sound. Dogs, pigs, goats, and tamarind monkeys, for example, move their larynxes downward when vocalizing. This suggests that Neanderthal speech might not have been as limited as the reconstruction indicates.
According to Deacon 1998, language areas of the brain appear to develop in response to the presence of linguistic signals. Sign language could have been possible 2 million years ago in Homo habilis groups. Contemporary research says that signing is controlled by the same regions in the brain as spoken language. Cultural and linguistic anthropology suggests that language and culture are intimately connected in complex ways, both in how language is learned and how it is used. Language, culture, thought, and perception are interrelated in complex ways. According to what has been stated earlier, certain part of the brain which is the left or language side indicated development in language, and this is likely present 2.5 million years ago. Archaeological artifacts and tools like cleavers, scrapers, and flake tools suggested that 800,000 years ago, Homo erectus groups were beginning to use culture and probably language to adapt to new environments. On the other hand, wearing decorative bead necklaces among Homo sapiens also suggests the self-awareness and individual identity and status. Early forms of fully articulated spoken language have been refined 125 years ago, while real language was used by our ancestors about 70,000 years ago. According to Lieberman, a hypothetical archaic hominid that was able to produce human speech would have been both a functional human-like Broca's area and a human-like supralaryngeal vocal tract. The same process took place for signed and spoken language. It's possible that transition from closed to open signs took place before spoken language was fully developed. Recent research suggests that the mental ability to create a fully structured language is a human capability. Whether it is exhibited in sign language or in spoken language is not as important as the fact that it exists. Imagine, children could have been play mimicking the calls of their elders, thus developing the ability to have a sound, just like this baby right here. These are just like what disguised languages have become, like Pig Latin or Shintori. Filipinos, on the other hand, use the G words. Putting it all together, anthropology's holistic interdisciplinarity seems uniquely suited to solving the puzzle of how and when language could have begun.